All right, so Bill, thank you very much for taking some time to sit down with us. I know that this story that we're about to get into is something that you've reiterated for the better part of 35 years. But as I've mentioned to you before, when I heard your story about the Pukwudgies in the Bridgewater Triangle, I felt a certain sincerity, a genuine article within this story and the person that you were relaying this. And it's always captured my focus in so many ways based on this intuition, and yet still today, going outside of what maybe happens in the Midwest, which we'll get into a little bit, you are the only person that I've ever heard of in the modern day that has actually seen a Pukwudgie physically with your own eyes and had this very direct encounter with it. Now, as we've talked about, this happened over in the Bridgewater Triangle. I believe you mentioned it was down near Raynham. Please let us know and kind of walk us through that interesting evening when you were walking Samantha, your dog, out in the woods in the Bridgewater Triangle.
Sure, and thanks for having me. Now, I think that I'm one of the few people that has seen this creature that we're calling a Pukwudgie. But I think the main thing is, I don't know anyone else that ever had a conversation with the creature. So that's what we'll talk about. Let's go back in time to the 1990s. Town of Raynham, everybody knows where it is. It's in the Bridgewater Triangle. It's the town next to Bridgewater.
Yep.
And where I lived was about a mile from the Nip, Lake Nipponicket, which is one of the hot spots. And I lived, my house abutted the High Tees, which is another hot spot, and not far from the Hockomock Swamp. All of these hot spots, but I had never heard of the Bridgewater Triangle. I'm not a paranormal guy, as I told you. I've never looked at the stars, never looked for UFOs, just never was into that. Baseball, football, so forth, you know, watching the Celtics, things like that. But, and no connection with the paranormal, and I'd never heard of the Bridgewater Triangle. So I had a job at that time where I worked 3:30 to midnight at the Raynham Iron Works. And I got home at midnight, and I take a walk with my dog Samantha every night. Before I did anything else, Sammy and I would faithfully take our walk. Now, we walked around our street, and we walked sometimes through the High Tees. So it was a route that was pretty much constant, but it varied slightly, but it fairly constant. Now, I have to tell you about the town of Raynham. Back in the 1990s, as I told you before, it's a small town. It was probably 5,000 or 6,000 people, a working class town, which means nobody watched Johnny Carson at 11:30 at night. They were in bed. They were hardworking people. They had to get up in the morning. So consequently, when I walked with Samantha, there were no lights on. I don't think I ever remember seeing a single light on at night. There were no cars on the street. And as I told you before, the town of Raynham did not have a midnight shift for the police officers. The last cop went home at midnight, and he called up the city of Taunton next door and said, "Hey, I'm leaving. You guys got it." So the city of Taunton would sit there and take the phone call, which hardly ever came. Back in those days, everybody got the newspaper, and the newspaper had a thing called the police blotter. Every day they'd publish all the calls that were phoned into the police departments, and there'd be nothing from midnight to 6 in the town of Raynham. So again, the town was really, really quiet after midnight. I was the only person out. I rarely saw a car passing. So Sam and I walked our route, generally the same route that we always walk. And on the way home that night, I was less than 200-300 yards from home when Sammy, an 80-pound dog, she was a mix between a Rottweiler and a Shepherd, pretty big girl. Sammy was pulling on her leash. "Sam, what's wrong?" Now, she's a calm dog, you know, she loved the walks and she enjoyed the walks, but all of a sudden she was straining at that leash and starting to whimper. Something was scaring my dog, but I have no idea what it is at this point. What's the matter, Sam? Sam, what's wrong? Sam, what's wrong? And then I heard what was bothering her. Kia, 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 I want you. Kia, I want you. These strange noises coming from I don't know where. I walked a little further back towards my house, and suddenly in the glow of a street light, I saw this strange thing that I thought was a kid. This was the Halloween season. So I thought it was on the sidewalk at that point, and I thought, well, this is a kid. And I said, hey, are you all right? Are you okay? Do you need help? Where do you live? And it started beckoning me with this paw or hand. Kia, Kia, I want you. Choo, I want you. I want you. Now I'm still thinking it's a kid. Are you okay? Can I help you? Kia, Kia. This hand or paw still beckoning me, and it wasn't responding to me. I was talking to it, but it never said anything except, Kia, Kia, I want you. I said, are you all right? Do you need help? Can I help you? Kia, Kia, I want you. And now Sammy was absolutely frightened. But I was torn. This little creature didn't look scary. Looked kind of like a teddy bear. Now, the pictures, there's an artist in Boston, John Gig, and he did the illustration for the Bridgewater Triangle movie, and he talked with me. He did 3 or 4 drawings. I said, John, that's not it. That's not it. That's not it. And then he came up with that final drawing. I think everybody's seen it. I said, John, that's it. That's what I saw. So you look at that picture and you see what I saw. That's not a threatening thing. No. It was, kind of a cute little thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm torn. Sammy's afraid of it. Sammy's not afraid of anything. She's a Rottweiler Shepherd. Rottweiler Shepherds, they're not babies. But she was afraid of that. So part of me is saying, I want to talk to this thing. And the other part of me is saying, I better get out of here quick. So I don't know how long it was, probably not more than 3 or 4 minutes. But Sammy's fear convinced me that I better go home. So I went home, went in, told my wife what I saw. And then I pretty much spent the whole night or most of the night just thinking about it. And I said, well, what was this thing saying, Kia, 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 I want you, Kia, Kia? I think it was trying to speak English. I think it's a creature that obviously had intelligence, and maybe it had its own language and was trying to speak English. Kia, Kia, come here, come here. And obviously the beckoning means come here, beckoning with its paw or hand. Kia, Kia, I want you. We want you. We want you. So that led me to believe that it was a representative of a larger group, that there were more of these things. We want you. Come here. Come here. So I told my wife about it, and a few other people, not a lot of people. For quite a while, I didn't say a whole lot. But I went out the next night and didn't see it again. And the next night, and so on for a few more years, and I never saw it again. And I wish I had. I told you the other day when we talked that if I see it again, Sam has long since passed away. If I see it again, I'm going to approach it. And I don't necessarily think that's going to be fatal. We talked about that before, you and I. I don't necessarily think it's going to be fatal. They say, people who talk about these Pukwudgies, that they can't come after you, that they have to draw you into their space. That doesn't make any sense to me. If something's evil, it's not going to have an imaginary line that it can't cross. If something's evil, it's going to come at me. And it didn't. Kia, he wants you. So I have regrets that I didn't speak with it, that I didn't go into its space.
You know, it's interesting that you bring up, the whole idea that, when you approach something like this, they may try to lure you in. And of course, there may be some sort of fateful moment that they capture you, take you, push you off a cliff. I mean, a lot of these things have been mentioned when it comes to the legend of the Pukwudgie. But, as we had discussed a little bit the other night when we were talking, bringing that parallel into vampires, inviting them into your home when they knock on the door to cross the threshold. The black-eyed children are the same exact way. They can't come home unless you give them permission. I think in some small way, if you were to go to that creature, you're giving the permission within the action, within the behavior, but it's so subtle, necessarily think about that when we're making a conscious decision, having a lot of physical movement with decisions that we make rather than something a little bit more underlying. That being said, Bill, it could very well just be a superstition that, that's the case. And, maybe you were to be an emissary of some sort of connecting braid between humanity and these particular entities. Now, I wanted to ask you very quickly, because you clearly do a very good job representing or reiterating that type of voice and the wordage, the phonetics that were coming out of its mouth. Obviously, you thought this might have been a child that you were encountering at first. How did the intonation sound? Did it sound high-pitched, or was there something a little less human about it? Was there any sort of distortion, gurgle, anything like that, or was it clear as a bell?
Great question. I've never been asked it that way before. I'm going to try to explain it that it was an otherworldly sound, but it sounded somewhat like the way I imitate it. But it was stranger, even stranger than my little imitation of it.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty unusual.
What we know about the Pukwudgies is that it dates back to Native American folklore, like tens of thousands of years ago. And from part of their folklore was that the Pukwudgies actually helped the Native Americans, but through the years they became more so like big giant klutz, and the Native Americans kind of casted them away. They wanted nothing to do with them, and the Pukwudgies were angry about it, and they used to torture. This was part of their folklore. They used to torture the Wampanoags. Actually, the Wampanoags feared these creatures, and it was said that the creatures were made by a creator giant named Moshop, and supposedly Moshop created Cape Cod. But it was said that the natives went to Moshop, this creator giant, and said, "Can you deal with these Pukwudgies? They're torturing our tribes." And from what we know that about this is that Moshop would pick up these Pukwudgies and shake them until they lose consciousness and toss them around New England. What's interesting is there's two different endings of the story. One states that these creatures came back strong and shot down Moshop with their poisonous arrows. The other story suggests that Moshop defeated these Pukwudgies and then later on died from being wounded in battle. But what's interesting is Moshop disappeared from Native American folklore at the same time these Pukwudgies did.
Harry, I never heard that before. I never heard that. That's very interesting. Now, perhaps this creature, we talked before, perhaps I was supposed to be an emissary. Maybe they want to make up for the past, forget about the past, and enter into a new dynamic.
Could be, yeah.
It's very possible. And, of course, the question always arises when somebody has an outlandish sort of experience like this. Why you? In your opinion, Bill, why do you think it was you that they had chosen to appear to? And, quite honestly, within whatever's been accounted for, nobody else has had this experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. You and I talked about it the other night. The only thing I can say is in that town where I lived, as I told you before, after midnight, there was nobody on the street except me. Every night, over a period of better than 5 years, I was out and I walked roughly that same route. And I think that I was watched. I think that I was being observed during that time. And I think that they knew more about me than you might expect them to know. They know that I would be sympathetic to their cause in a sense. I think we all feel bad about the way the Native Americans were treated. So I think they saw in me someone in sympathy with them. And I think that perhaps that's why I was selected to speak to them. And I might, if I had spoken to them, as I said to you before, maybe I would be the go-between, putting things right between this group of, we can't call them people, I guess they're just a different race, but between the two races, the human race and the Pukwudgie race. Maybe I'm supposed to be the emissary, but it never came back and I never saw it again. And I wish I had.
One of the most sorry, go ahead, Barry.
Oh, what's interesting is this happened near power lines. And I noticed all throughout the Hockomock Swamp, there's power lines, and power lines, as we know, give off EMFs, an electromagnetic field, which I believe is drawing in these anomalies, since ghost entities, they channel off that kind of energy.
Good point, Harry. Now they talk about the high T's. They talk about the emissions causing cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got vocal cord cancer at that same time in that period.
Huh.
4 operations, lost my voice. It came back a little bit. You can hear I can still speak a little bit, but it doesn't go very far. It doesn't go far. I got do, re, mi, but there's no fa, if you know what I mean. So I had the vocal cord cancer. My wife got cancer. So, hey,
Interesting.
I think maybe those power lines do a lot of harm, but I don't really know for sure. But I think there's something to that about the power lines. I think that energy seems to have some effect in the paranormal world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's to the point where if you were to buy a home that was located underneath these lines or close by, you're getting this home for much cheaper than you would somewhere else. And I think this has been a pattern since at least the 80s.
It doesn't seem to, my son still lives in the house, same house. And the values on that street are high. It doesn't seem to be a factor. And I made a secret of what street I lived on. So, if you try to buy a house there, it could cost you a lot of money.
Well, one of the curious aspects about you bringing back the voice and what was being said to you by this creature is that it sounded like there was a bit of English in there, enough for you to make an inference as to what it was trying to communicate. To me, that insinuates that these creatures are, at the very least, around other human beings, or maybe watching from the thick and picking up some of those traits in an observational sense, enough for it to try and communicate with you, trying to learn English. I mean, obviously, the Wampanoag tribe had their own dialect and mode of language. It wasn't similar to English. So, to me, once again, this sort of means these things are still around. And people talk about a multidimensional sense about these creatures, that they have some sort of magical element to them. When you had your encounter and you were seeing this with your naked eye, did you have any inkling that perhaps there was a different facet about this creature that you weren't noticing or understanding within that moment? Or did it seem just purely physical to you?
No. It seemed, it seemed to have a body. It was real. And I should mention something else. There's a gentleman who lives near my house, who owns a lot of property, all wooded, and there's a few ponds on there. And he and I have talked since, and he's collected hairs from a den of some sort of creatures, long hairs. Don't know. I'm not saying Bigfoot, don't know. And the gentleman doesn't know. He just knows there was some sort of a den in his property, and he found long hairs, some of it bunched up almost like a pillow. So that's another thing that's going on in that neighborhood, same neighborhood.
We could certainly, if you were open to the process, have those analyzed, but something that perhaps you can bring to them at a certain point and go forward with that if that's an option. But yeah, we can certainly have those analyzed. We have plenty of people in the background that have the capability to do that. But that is really curious that there was some sort of artifact found, and maybe it doesn't have to do with the Pukwudgie, maybe it doesn't have to do with Sasquatch, maybe it has something to do with some sort of creature or cryptid that's been out there, again, in a physical sense that we're just not aware of. But it'd be curious to find, as we've done with Sasquatch specifically, some of these hair samples containing a certain percentage of what we consider human DNA, or certain observance of that, and then outside of this, there's no real measure or quantification for the other parts of that structure. So, hey, just a thought as we go. Harry, you have any questions?
Yeah, I noticed you said that you went home, you told your wife. Now, what did she think about this? Did she say, oh, Bill, you're crazy, go back to bed, or did she believe you?
No, she believed me absolutely 100%. 100%. She also was not a paranormal person, but she could tell when we came in that we were shocked, in a state of shock from what we had seen, Samantha and I, and she could tell just by the way I was acting that I saw something that was really strange.
How long did it take you before you came out with the story?
Well, Harry, I'm going to say it was probably a year or more. I wrote a blog about it. I didn't want it to just, kind of go away. I wasn't necessarily looking for publicity or anything like that, but I wanted to make a record of it. So I put it in the blog, which only had a few readers, but one of them was Aaron Cadieux, and he called up and said, I want you to be in a movie I'm making about the Bridgewater Triangle. What's the Bridgewater Triangle, Aaron? I don't know what you're talking about. So I learned quickly.
And that's kind of similar to what happened to me when I was 14, when I had my Thunderbird experience. I didn't even know what the Bridgewater Triangle was until many years later.
I lived in Norton when that officer, Tom Downey, had the encounter. And that was the town of Norton, which isn't too far away from Raynham, maybe a half-hour drive.
Yeah.
And he was besieged with people, hundreds of people just bothering him all the time, and he just didn't want any part of it. And he finally just said, I'm not talking about it anymore. The thing picked up his police car. You guys probably heard about it. It picked up the back end of his police car while he was on patrol. And Thomas Downey had never, like me, he wasn't a paranormal guy, never had any encounter before or after that, didn't look at the stars, didn't go out on expeditions, it was just something that happened to him.
Much like this individual that you're mentioning, he seemed to be an ordinary guy, just going about his daily routines and what he was doing responsibly for a job. And yet he found himself in the spotlight sometime after, as you mentioned, many people flocking to talk to him, maybe see the area that it happened, perhaps haven't experienced themselves. Within your experience, Bill, what did this do for you in your life and your family? Did it propel you into some sort of stardom, or did you just, how did this affect you?
Unlike Officer Tom Downey, nobody ever bothers me about this. It rarely comes up. People that know me they just take it as a matter of course that, yeah, he saw something really weird. Okay, let's go to the ball game. I mean, no, I've never had any bad experiences. I've never had any problems with people bothering me about it. It doesn't come up very often in conversation.
Was the Pukwudgie wearing any sort of articles of clothing that you could discern, or did it seem like it was just covered with hair, en natural?
That's a good question, and I would say you're correct. I don't think it had any clothing at all, no attire. It was just a furry thing.
Now, when you saw it, you said you continued walking home. Did you walk around the creature, or did the creature just walk off back towards the high tees?
Oh, no, it was on one side of the street, and I was on the other side, Harry. And I never approached it. I never got anywhere near it. I stayed in one spot for a few minutes and then started slowly to go back to the house. And I thought perhaps it was going to follow me. So, I kept looking back, and I was happy to see it was not following me. And so I went back home. And I expected that it might be at the window or something. So I did check the windows every once in a while that night. Turn on the back lights and turn on the front lights, and apparently it just went back to wherever it lives.
Because I'm trying to picture your street. So it was on the side of the high tees or on the left side.
That's another interesting point, Harry. It wasn't on the high T side; it was on the other side of the street. Which actually, all of that now it's built up. There's a school been built there, but. Back in 1990, beyond my street was all wooded also. So on either side of the street. Now that's not the case. But so it didn't necessarily have to come out of the high tees. It could have come out of the woods on the other side of the street.
Yeah.
What do you think would have happened with your story, Bill, if we didn't have the internet to post a blog about this or connect with each other? Do you think that there would still be people who knew about what you had experienced, or do you think this would have been something you kept closer to your chest as you got older?
If there were no internet, nobody would know about this because I don't go around talking about it. I don't, people I meet in conversation. At the bingo hall, I live in a retirement community, bingo every week. I never say, hey, guess what I saw 30 years ago? Most of the people don't know that I had this connection unless they watch Discovery Channel. They say, I saw you on TV last night. If they watch Discovery Channel, or if they're on Amazon Prime and they happen to click on Bridgewater Triangle, but I'm in South Florida. People in South Florida aren't clicking on the Bridgewater Triangle. But it does happen every few weeks. So I saw you on TV. What? What's that you saw?
Good conversation starter, to say the least.
Now, do you think that these Pukwudgies are in connection with these skinwalkers that are out west?
I don't even watch that show.
Oh, all right.
I've never watched it. I know it's on History Channel because they told me when they called me and they filmed me. They told me, "Oh, it's Beyond Skinwalker." I'm sorry, guys. I'm not a paranormal guy. I don't watch the show. I didn't even know who the quote stars of the show were. I thought they were just like stagehands. They're asking me questions, and I'm saying, "What are these guys asking me questions for?" Well, they're the stars of the show. Oh, really? Oh, sorry.
Well, I think about what you said about being that emissary, between our race and perhaps their race. And of course, in the back of my mind linger all these different aspects of the legend and way of threats and danger. But when you go out to the Midwest, and it was Illinois specifically, but, in that general area, Idaho, so forth, there was one particular incident where a girl was playing on the playground at school, and a whole tribe of these things emerged from the woods. Now, it was not only seen by the little girl, but many of the other students on the playground. And what was reported was that they just seemed to be curious with what she was doing. They didn't necessarily have any ill intent, at least the way that they had approached her. And of course, the experience was brief enough, but everybody kind of still had a recollection of what had happened. So that's really curious to me, considering that your intuitive feeling was that you were not afraid. And the only reason that you went the other direction is because Samantha was, acting the way that she was. And you thought perhaps this is, something I should, steer away from, because look, it's the dog. And if the dog has an intuitive sense about it, sometimes you want to listen to that gut instinct. I find that very curious. But to go back very quickly to the physiology of this particular being, okay, so you mentioned that it beckons with its paw or its hand. Did you see any separated fingers? Did it have, more like a cloven hoof sort of look? I mean, did you get a chance to, kind of view the feet? Did you see toes? Was it pot-bellied? I mean, I know I'm asking a lot, and it's one of those things that within the moment, we can even create certain memories around that memory, being as long as it has. But do you have any recollection of very specific details within that physiology that you haven't expressed otherwise?
No, I can't say if it had fingers. It just, beckoned to me with what I call a paw.
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that it had some sort of fingers, but no, I didn't see a hand or anything like that. It wasn't wearing clothing. It had just this, this appearance of a big furry thing. Or it was pot-bellied. I did mention that. It did have a pot belly, and I always thought that, to me, it looked like it was an older creature, not in extreme old age, but in what we call something more than middle age and not old age. So I think it was an older creature, and it was pot-bellied.
How tall was this creature?
Well, I always say about 3 feet.
That's
rough.
That's the reported size of these Pukwudgies.
Yeah, Harry, it could have been a little bit bigger than that. 3 feet is a yardstick.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking, I got a yardstick right over here. And as I look at the yardstick from where I am, I'm only 5 feet from it. It looks to me like the creature was taller than the yardstick. Not 5 feet, but maybe 4 feet. So let's say between 3 and 4 feet, but closer to 4 than 3, I think.
Was its anatomy more spindly or thin, or did it have definable muscles, muscle tone, anything like that you could pick up on?
No muscles. It had the pot belly. It wasn't thin. It wasn't fat, but it was, sort of average shape, but it did have the pot belly.
Now, I mentioned this, or I asked you this question when we spoke, of course. I asked you if you were a religious man, and you had mentioned that at the time it wasn't a big part of your life, but today it certainly is. Within this particular sighting, seeing something as anomalous as what you've seen, does that put a different spin on what you hold for a belief, or does it sort of play into your religion? You have a place for it, even though it may not mention it in any sort of holy scripture. How does that affect the way that you view religion in that sense?
Well, I don't think there's any correlation between the Pukwudgie and how I feel now about religion. How I feel now about religion is just I came to the conclusion that we all need to follow the golden rule. We need to be nice to people, do unto others, that kind of thing. Part of that comes with old age. You start thinking about, well, there's two things that can happen after you die: nothing or something. So maybe
that's fair. Yeah.
maybe there's something. So I feel that in case there's something, I want to have a clean report card.
Sounds about right, and very safe, of course. I had an uncle who would, being pressed to say, hey, do you believe in God? He would say, well, I'm not going to say I do, and I'm not going to say I don't, because I don't want to be wrong either way. Makes sense. Absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the things that, we often look at when it comes to what's happening on the eastern seaboard versus somewhere else in the country, specifically, not going too global for the moment in respect to the conversation. I look at Mothman down at, West Virginia. We saw a very specific looking Mothman back in the 60s and 70s, hunched in, head, just sort of glowing red eyes, these wings, and it would fly. And yet today we have other items or elements that we would call Mothman, but they actually look more like some sort of winged humanoid. So it may be a misnomer in respect to what we're seeing, what we knew about, and what we're understanding going forward. And I think sometimes this may apply to the Pukwudgies. I mean, there's another phenomenon that is very much, excuse me, rooted in the Northeast here, and those are the melon heads. Now, there's a whole bunch of stories on what these little guys are and what part of the woods they inhabit and why. But it's very possible that when we see a creature like this, given the fact that you were in the Bridgewater Triangle and where you were specifically, we might be able to derive that particular definition based on your description of what the creature was. It sounds exactly like what we would find in Wampanoag tradition as a Pukwudgie. But when you go out to the Midwest, we're not really sure what those particular beings looked like. I mean, we obviously weren't there for the experience, along with some of these children and other people who had seen them. I guess there's a slew of folks out there who have actually seen them. I don't know how prevalent it is today, but in the past, even recent past, it was something of note. But I can't say it's the same creature. And I think it would be sometime if we were ever able to make that type of connection wherein we would be able to study together or have some sort of research. But hey, you never know what tomorrow brings.
Yeah, I actually don't know anything about the Mothman. I've heard the term, but I don't know anything about that.
Just a parallel to draw between what we knew as the original Mothman and what people say is the Mothman today. They're vastly different things. And it may be something similar with the Pukwudgies. You had a very original sighting, and then what people see after this might be something a little bit different given the location and the distance between however it goes. But Harry, as you mentioned, this mythological being, as we could call it, picking these little guys up, shaking them and throwing them across whatever nation, that's very indicative of certain Native American culture. We've had a lot of these particular elements in respect to spreading out of certain consciousness or people or a certain breed of animal, given that story. So that's very curious, and again, an interesting parallel to sort of look and mull over. But within your experience, and we'll wrap up soon here because I really appreciate your time, but I definitely wanted to ask you what was the question I was going to ask you? I had it. It was sitting at the tip of my tongue and I swallowed it. Hold on. Harry, fill in the blank here. Let me get back to this one.
Well, I seen your videos on Lake Nippinicket on YouTube. So have you heard of like similar looking creatures that are out in the islands? Because it was on the original documentary.
Harry, I've spent a lot of time at the Nip. Sammy and I used to swim there. Back in the 1990s, there was a beautiful sandy beach at the Nip.
Yes. Yep.
And every year, supposedly, there were a lot of drownings. I had heard of one or two, but apparently there were a lot more than that. So the town brought in rocks and covered up the beach. So that stopped the swimming. I've never seen anything strange at the Nip, but they do talk about fires at night that people see and glowing lights and things like that. And I've never seen anything strange at the Nip. Sam and I only went during the day. I may have been there at night, but I don't recall for sure. But I never saw anything strange at the Nip, but I did hear a lot of stories, Harry, about the Nip.
Yeah.
It was a great swimming area. I'm sorry they closed it down.
Yeah.
And you could walk all the way across it. I never walked all the way across it, and I'll tell you why. It's supposedly only 3 feet deep on average, and its deepest it might be 5 feet or so. But I always felt that there were trenches, perhaps, that might be 9 feet. And I always felt that I would be walking and maybe hit a trench, and maybe there was a current or something. So I never wanted to go all the way across the Nip. I never got any weird feelings. It just seemed to make sense that, I don't think you should walk all the way across. I don't know if anyone ever has done it, but I guess it could be done.
Yeah.
Well, within the stories of sinkholes and other tectonic activity that happens in that area, it's very possible that, even quicksand you wouldn't see it. You know what I mean? But I think you following your intuition on that was probably a good idea, even though I don't know would have come if you had actually decided to, make that trek. Probably better off that we didn't find out.
Yeah.
Harry, thanks for coming to my aid there. I do remember what I was going to ask you, Bill. What are there any elements of this story that you have not relayed publicly that you kind of held on to or kind of breezed over because you thought maybe it didn't really fit in with what you were expressing? Is there anything that has been left out in your story that we just aren't aware of?
To the best of my knowledge, I've told the story exactly the way it happened, exactly what I saw, and there really is no other detail. I laid it all out there. There's nothing that I did not tell. And the only thing is, I'm sorry that I haven't seen it again. I told you that before. I tried, like I said, for another couple of years, walking the same route, and never saw it, never heard it again, and I wish I had.
Well, thank you very much, Harry. Do you have any other questions for Bill?
Did you ever think, like maybe a couple of years later, did you ever think that maybe that there was some other evidence to what the creature could be, or is it based in your mind that yes, it's 100% what you saw?
Well, the only thing, as I told you, I was talking to the gentleman who owns all the wooded property, and he told me some things that he had seen, and he found that lair with all the hair, and I think that that's where they live. The thing that I saw probably is in that area. Generally speaking, we're talking about White Street, that area of Raynham.
Okay. Yep.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else you have to go on, Harry, I think we'll close out here. But Bill, I want to thank you not only for just sharing your story, but the bravery to do so, especially back in the 90s where, it was much easier to be ostracized for any sort of anomalous or wild story experience that we could have gone through. You may not think of it that way, that it takes, a little bit of steel underneath you to actually go forward with that. But, honestly, through everything I've seen and I've experienced, you need to have that solidity within yourself. And you've never changed your story. You never changed any detail in any of the accounts that I've heard you speak on, which again lends to the sincerity and it lends to the genuine article of what you're expressing to us. Now, when we look into the world of ufology or even the paranormal, sometimes people have differing thoughts, and as time goes on, those change. You have always stayed right in line, I think, with what you originally intended to present to us in respect to that experience. So once again, I want to thank you for taking the time and being persistent when people inquire about this and being open-minded and open-hearted in expressing that experience to everyone, including us. Thank you so much, Bill.
One funny thing that did happen on occasion, the guys at the Ironworks just took it as a matter of course. All the people I know just, yeah, he saw something. But I did have a couple of funny experiences at places where people would see me and say, "Oh, look, here's Ewan Chu." So I got that label in a few places, and I thought that was kind of cute.
Oh, it is. It could be much worse.
Actually, before we wrap it up, I just want to mention that it was probably the beginning of this year. We were investigating the Josiah Keefe house, which is the oldest house in Easton. I'm sure you know where it's at. There was two guys that lived there, their roommates. One of them said that he heard in the woods at Wheaton's farm something similar to what you were describing. And he's never even seen the Bridgewater Triangle documentary until his roommate played it. He didn't see the creature, but he heard ear.
That's interesting.
And to know that they would reach out to another too, I mean, in that area, I wonder if there are more people out there who have had this experience and just hesitate to come forward or have some sort of reticence in whatever experience they had. It's very possible that they may not have stopped with you, Bill, that they might continue to still reach out to us. And who knows, if we're walking out on a deserted street in that vicinity of where they habitate, any one of us could, again, have that type of experience. I relate a little bit, to what I had in respect to my brush with the Pukwudgie, which I won't reiterate here because, I've talked about it a few times, not only on the channel, but in other interviews. but it wasn't a physical presence. I mean, not really. I mean, you couldn't see it with your naked eye, but you could feel the darn thing, and that's different though than what you saw, being completely out of the element and popping out of whatever wooded area is this little creature in which you have some sort of dialogue with to whatever degree. So it's very incredible, and again, one of the stories that has stuck with me for so many years. I can't tell you how honored I am to talk to you about it.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And Harry, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Now, guys, for those of you who don't know, Harry is, in my mind, the Bridgewater Triangle historian. He's the guy you go to, okay? Because when you do, you're going to come back with a lot of answers, a lot of research, and a lot of information that you didn't prior to talking to him. So Harry's the guy. He's always out there in that area, always researching, always documenting. Please go and check out his channel, the Bridgewater Triangle Paranormal Investigators. He's also put out an awesome documentary on the Bridgewater Triangle that makes mine pale in comparison. And I'm okay with saying that because it was done so well that I have to give him that praise and recognition. But until next time, guys, stay inquisitive, stay explorative, and in the words of the late Damian Gray, question everything. Ciao.